Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. This is our last workshop or webinar for this school year. And we have our great Jamie Brassell coming and talking to us about little learners and big emotions. She's especially going to focus on anxiety in little children and perhaps share with us some resources that maybe we can implement in our classrooms. I'm just putting in the chat the link to our LinkedIn page in case you're not yet a member of our group. You can follow us there where you can see any updates, share resources, experiences, ideas, or things that you would actually like to learn further that we can plan for the next webinars in the next year, for example. And you can also see a QR code in this on this slide that if you scan it, you can go in and write down also some suggestions of things that you may want us to look into for next year, and maybe prepare some presentations for the future, some webinars or workshops, or even if you would like to present something or you're very strong in something that you can share with the entire community, you can type it in there, and then we'll use that information when we meet to plan ahead. So Jamie, I'm gonna leave the room for you. The floor is yours. Jamie works as a counselor at the Leipzig International School. She currently works in the kindergarten section, and I'm excited to hear everything that she has to share with us.
Thank you, Bea. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, and I apologize again for keeping everyone waiting. Just had a little bit of a technical difficulty. Just reminded me of back in the day when it was lockdown and this was a daily occurrence, all the little technical difficulties that would come up with that. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk to you today. But just to tell you a little bit about me, I am an educational psychologist. I am originally from South Africa. I started off as a preschool teacher, and over the years in South Africa, I worked as a learning support teacher, a language teacher, preschool, primary school. I eventually became a counselor, and after many years, in South Africa, it takes about 15 years to reach that point, I eventually became an educational psychologist. Currently, I'm working at Leipzig International School in Germany, and I'm mainly based at the kindergarten, where I work with children age 6 and under, which is the age group that we are going to be focusing on in our discussions today. It's my absolute favorite age group to work with. So anxiety is a very significant topic to all of us, whether you're personally affected by it, or the children that you work with, or someone else that you know, someone in your family. It's a very popular topic. It's one of the most common mental health concerns amongst children and adults. The prevalence is actually very high. So anxiety disorders are seen in about 1 in 8 children. And in the age group of 2 to 5-year-olds, about 10% of children show signs of an anxiety disorder already. So for us as adults, I think many of us are familiar with that overwhelming feeling that anxiety is, that feeling that comes up completely uninvited at the worst possible time, and the racing thoughts and everything else that goes with that. And while there are some similarities in how anxiety presents in adults and children, there are also some vast differences, especially in these very early developmental years of 0 to 6 years old. And that can bring about its own unique sets of challenges, which would, of course, require very unique approaches. So we're going to start off today by just examining our perceptions. So how we view anxiety itself. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can define anxiety and understand it, and especially how it can manifest specifically in young children under the age of 6. And then we're going to look a little bit at how we can redefine these perceptions. So we often talk about redefining roles. So today we're going to be talking about the role of redefining our perceptions of anxiety. And then we're going to look at some strategies for support. So something very interesting that I found, because anxiety is one of the most common mental health conditions, it's also one of the most popular in pop culture. We often see it on social media or in movies, in songs. It's pretty much everywhere. So if you go into your own Google search history, maybe you'll find something about anxiety as well. But it was very interesting to see that there has been an increase in how often anxiety is Googled over the past 20 years. Maybe that's just because 20 years ago, people were less likely to use the internet. I don't know, I'm not a Google Analytics expert, but we can definitely see that there has been what seems to be an increasing interest of people searching for information about anxiety. And we often hear the term "my anxiety" used very, very often, on social media and in daily life. It's common to hear people say, "Oh, my anxiety is flaring up again today," or "I'm not going to be able to go to that end of year party. My anxiety just won't allow it." So it's becoming a lot more normalized. And on the one hand, it's fantastic that mental health awareness is growing and that mental health challenges are becoming more accepted and better understood. But that's a bit of a double-edged sword as well, because on the other hand, when mental health terms are used in such a casual way, this can lead to misconceptions. There's a vast difference between anxiety and an anxiety disorder, because anxiety itself is not a mental disorder. And these misconceptions can shape our perceptions and influence how we manage anxiety in ourselves, and also, of course, subsequently in the children that we work with and care for. So I've seen quite a few of these misconceptions in different situations. And one example that I'm going to give is in the past when I have been at a social gathering, and if there are any South Africans in the that have joined us tonight, then you'll know what I mean by a braai. A braai is a social gathering where everyone stands around the fire, and anxiety is always a guest at a braai when there are new faces, because you have to make small talk. So once you get past that initial phase of introducing yourself and making small talk, everyone normally gets to that question of what do you do? And when I would tell them that I am a therapist for children, there were normally 3 questions that I would get. Do you see a lot of children? How old are the children that you see? And why are these children brought to you? What are some of the main reasons that these children are brought to see you? For some reason, those were always the 3 main questions that I was asked. When I was in private practice in South Africa, I was seeing around 60 children a week for individual and group therapy. And most of them, depending on the time of the year, most of them were coming to see me for anxiety. So when I would tell people this, they were normally very shocked. A lot of them would react by saying, "Oh, well, I guess you must see a lot of teenagers then." And that's the point where I would say, and actually it's the other way around, teenagers actually give me anxiety. That's why I prefer to work with children under the age of 6. People were really shocked to hear that. And the response that I would get would be, how can 3-year-old children, have anxiety? What could they possibly have to be worried about? Are there really so many big problems in their lives? So at no point in the conversation did I tell people that I'm seeing children for big problems, or that it's anything extreme like that. But what that suggested to me is that there are a lot of assumptions that had already been made in that moment. So the assumptions would be that because a child is in therapy or counseling, something terrible or drastic must be happening in their lives. The second assumption would be that children should not experience anxiety. That's something that's for grown-ups or for teenagers. And the third assumption is that anxiety is something terrible. And those assumptions suggest that there is this common misunderstanding that children either do not or should not experience feelings like this, and also that it shouldn't be taken as seriously as it would be for a teenager or for a grown-up. But if we look at the Google search trends again, also very interesting, is that anxiety in children is a topic that is searched significantly more frequently than anxiety in children than anxiety in adults. And the data shows that it has been this way for the past 20 years. So even back in 2004, when we would think that people would have been a bit less likely to Google something than today, the interest was just as high, and it looks like actually even higher than it is today. So the data suggests that people have been interested in and concerned about anxiety in children for a long time, but yet when we're at social gatherings, there still seems to be this misconception that anxiety is something that shouldn't be happening in children, and especially children as young as 6 years old or younger. And it also looks like we've got parents and teachers frantically Googling, why is my child anxious? Even more than they are asking themselves, why am I anxious? Even though there's research that indicates that exposure to adults with chronic anxiety can increase the potential for childhood anxiety. I mean, we know that children are like sponges, and they absorb everything around them. So besides for genetic factors, when adults model anxious behavior and coping mechanisms, then children are more likely to learn and adopt that behavior. Something else that is interesting, if we look at the Google search trends, is that when it comes to younger children, so specifically babies and toddlers, the search volume drops significantly. So people are looking for information on anxiety in children, but not really for babies and toddlers. And actually, interestingly enough, the numbers for teenagers drops quite low as well. So that would suggest that people who are using Dr. Google for information on anxiety, they're doing this a lot more often for children, but the very early developmental years possibly are being neglected. It doesn't mean that it is, but very often Google is a place that we immediately go for information. I would hope that this means that people are actually talking to doctors and to real people to get this information, and not just looking online. But it's just interesting to see the difference, and if there are still these misconceptions. So before we head into our first breakout room, I'd like you to take a moment to consider the role of perceptions. The perceptions are very subjective, but they can also be very powerful because they shape the way that we approach everything. And it's very important to examine our perceptions of anxiety, because they shape how we respond to anxiety in the children, how we recognize it, how we regulate ourselves in those moments, and then initially how we respond to the children as well. So take a moment to think about what comes to mind when you hear the term anxiety and when you hear the term anxious child. Think of it about what thoughts, what feelings, what words, what images come into your mind. And if you'd like to, you can share those in the chat. Otherwise, you can just write it down or put it into your phone, or you can just keep it in mind. And then we'll use those responses a little bit later as well. So give you a moment just to think about it and reflect on it. And there's no right or wrong answers as well, just anything at all, any word, any situation, anything that comes into your mind. Yeah, so I'm seeing the word stress quite often as well. Okay, so you can keep on adding your thoughts about that, or writing them down, but keep those in mind because we're going to use them later on as well. When I was looking at the Google search trends, I also looked at what exactly were people Googling when they were looking for information on anxiety in babies and toddlers. And the terms that came up most frequently in the searches were words like sleep, bedtime, night, nightmares, crying, biting, and behavior. Those were the ones that were coming up most often for younger children specifically. For older children, it was things like social anxiety, friends, school. But for younger children, the words were mostly centered on things like bedtime and crying. So, I mean, that was really interesting because, words like nightmares and crying, those are frequently associated with young children. So I was wondering, if these are things that are so frequently searched, then why is it still a shock to some people that young children can experience anxiety, or that children experiencing elevated levels of anxiety, that they would be in therapy? So maybe those behaviors are less likely to be attributed to anxiety because they are so common. Maybe people don't realize that those are actually manifestations of anxiety. That's an option, that's a possibility. So as we go into our first breakout room, sorry, I don't know why my screen had frozen for a second. As we go into our first breakout room, the discussion that I would like you to have, and some thoughts that I would like you to bring up are on the different perceptions and understandings of anxiety. So I've shared an example of one of my experiences, at social gatherings where people are really shocked to hear that young children are actually receiving therapeutic support and young children actually do experience anxiety. What are some of your experiences that you've had, and what are some different perceptions or understandings of anxiety and anxious children have you come across? And with that in mind, with all this growing awareness in mental health and anxiety, have you noticed any changes in perceptions? Is it maybe similar to what we've seen with the trends in the Google search trends, or have you noticed something different? Okay. So Bea, I think you're going to put us into the different breakout rooms.
I'm just about to open them up.
Okay.
How many did you have in each room? I can do about 3 to 4.
But any amount.
How many are we? Yeah, 4.
Okay, I'll do 3 to 4.
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay. Just wait until everybody is back. Okay. Looks like everyone's back. Okay, so I hope that you were able to have some interesting, enlightening discussions. One of the things the thoughts that came up for me in my breakout room was a memory that I had of having to say goodbye to my 6-year-old niece. I'd gone to a school to do a therapy session with a child in her class, and how she screamed when she thought that I was coming to pick her up and I was actually there for another child, and the separation anxiety that she had, even though I told her in advance that I was coming to pick up one of her friends and not her, and just that horrible feeling that I had of having to walk away, knowing that she was screaming for me. So I think I don't have children of my own. So for a parent, I can't imagine what that feeling must be like. Another thing that came up for us was that sometimes or not sometimes, actually a lot of the time, it is the parent that has more of the anxiety, especially with separation anxiety. And the child is usually fine. They might cry for a minute or two after having to say goodbye, but they of course do feed off that anxiety from the parents. So clinginess is something that's seen quite often, and yeah, definitely the role of the parent, and also of the caregiver as well, and the parent's perception of the caregiver. If the parent trusts the caregiver, then the child is more likely to feel relaxed with being handed over to that caregiver as well. So I hope you were able to have some interesting discussions and to get some thoughts going on the role of perceptions, because depending on if you are a parent as well, or what your role in working with children is, of course, that would influence your perceptions and what your experiences have been. But very, very important to keep in mind, how we see anxiety itself, how we see other people who are working with the same children that we are working with. They can all play a very big role in how we approach these situations. Okay, so a lot of the words that I saw coming up in the chat were things, like stress and fear, words that we would normally associate with negativity. And it's common for us to associate anxiety with very negative words, or words that have negative connotations. And that's understandable, because anxiety is a very uncomfortable feeling. There is a reason for that. Sorry, my screen seems to have frozen again. I don't know, this is the day of technical difficulties for me. So the reason that anxiety is such an uncomfortable feeling is because it is our body's natural response to threats. It is characterized by feelings of worry or nervousness, and these are not very pleasant feelings to have. Specifically, these are feelings of nervousness about future events or uncertain outcomes, and that's the difference between anxiety and fear. Fear is that moment that feeling that you have in a moment where there is an actual threat, something is happening right now. But anxiety is the feeling that you get where you are worried about or scared of something that might happen, might not happen, potentially could happen in the future, and you're not too sure about it. So it serves as more of an alert system. It's kind of like your insurance system. Your body gets you worked up and ready just in case something's going to happen, but it might not happen as well. So it serves as a protective function, which can be very uncomfortable. So naturally, it is going to be associated with more negative words. So in play therapy, what we tend to tell children, because we need to have a nice story or a nice way to explain these to children so that they can understand. Emotions are a very abstract thing for children to understand. So to try and make emotions a little bit more concrete for children, I normally tell them that feelings are visitors. They don't stay forever. So just like when someone comes over for a play date, they don't stay forever. They just come for a little while. Sometimes more than one friend comes over for a play date, just like that. Sometimes more than one feeling comes to visit at the same time. And each feeling has a special job that they have to do. And we have to let them do those special jobs, because those jobs are very important. Those jobs are to help us learn important lessons that can help us to stay safe. And they can help us to, essentially, they help us to be okay. These are our survival mechanisms. So this is a nice way to explain to children that each emotion has a biological purpose. Emotions are an information system. It's the communication system between the body and the brain to ensure our survival and our well-being. So how exactly does anxiety do this? So the first thing that anxiety does, or the first thing that our bodies do when we're in a potentially threatening situation, sensory input will go in, through your senses, through your eyes, through your ears, through your skin. So there would be some kind of event where you will take in information through your senses. Then that information goes on a journey. Goes on a journey along your afferent neurons to the brain, and when it gets to the brain, then the information is processed. If that information is processed as being a threat, which could happen, sometimes even if it is not a threat, the brain might recognize it as a potential threat, that is when the hypothalamus is activated. And after that, that is when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, which is what causes all of the lovely physiological changes that come with anxiety. So the release of adrenaline, increased heart rate, all of those things that we experience when we get our fight or flight response, that is what follows after that. So a way to explain that to children would be to say that anxiety's important job is to help our bodies and our minds get ready for tasks that might be difficult or uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Because in order for anxiety to do its job, which is to prepare us for potential threats or for potential challenges, it would need to come and visit us when we are faced with either something that's new, because if something's new, we don't know what to expect with it, we might need to be a bit more alert than usual. Or something that's uncomfortable, our bodies might need to be on higher alert so that we're ready to get up and run if we need to, or that we're ready to respond. Or if something's difficult, we might naturally need a bit more energy, or we might need to be able to react a little bit faster than usual. So that's anxiety's important job, to help us get ready for moments like that. It just doesn't help that we're already in an uncomfortable situation and then we have these physically uncomfortable feelings of anxiety that come with it as well. So for young children, that can be really difficult to navigate and to understand why that's there. So the core features of anxiety, because there's different ways that anxiety can manifest, and especially in young children, these, like I said, there's some similarities, but there's also some vast differences. So we have the physiological effects in our body. Then we have the cognitive effects, and sometimes those don't always balance out and line up. I mean, I can think of plenty of times that I have felt, in my mind, I feel perfectly confident, but I still start to get physiological effects. I'll still have the increased heart rate or the shaking, and then half the time I can't understand why, because in my mind I feel 100% confident. So maybe you can also think of some examples that you have had an experience like that, where things are just not lining up. So physical anxiety and cognitive or psychological anxiety, those are not always the same thing. And then we also have the behavioral aspect, which is the way that we respond to these physiological changes or to these cognitive thoughts that we have. So some of the physiological changes that we might have, some of these, again, are exactly the same for adults as they are for children, but they might manifest a bit differently in the behavior. So the heightened senses, those are there because we are on high alert. Our body wants to make sure that we are aware of what is happening around us. So for children who have sensory sensitivities or a lower sensory threshold, that might become even more difficult for them in moments of anxiety, or that might even contribute more to their anxiety if they are in environments that are loud. And it doesn't even have to be a very loud environment. I mean, if a child has a lower sensory threshold, what is considered loud for us and them might be very, very different. Stomach cramps or nausea, very often, we'll hear a child say that their stomach is sore. The biological reason for that is when we're anxious, because of the physiological changes, the blood is flowing away from the stomach and it's flowing to the brain and to the muscles, getting the muscles and the body ready to react. And because of that lack of blood flow to the stomach, that's where we get that feeling of butterflies or that nervous stomach. So you might find that a child says that they don't want to eat, they're not hungry, or their stomach is sore, or anything to do with the stomach. You might find that they're sitting with their hands on their stomach. That could also be an indication of anxiety. The increased heart rate in babies, the heart rate sometimes is higher in general, but with older children in that age group as well, they might have a higher heart rate than usual. That's just to get the body ready for movement, for the fight or flight response. Breathing might be more rapid. With the muscles, the children might feel a bit more tense, or they might say that their body is sore, or they might have a weak bladder. So they might either wet themselves, or they might be needing to go to the bathroom more often than usual. Going to the bathroom can also be an avoidance response, so that can combine with the physiological and the behavioral aspect of it as well. Then because of the increased stress hormones, the increase of adrenaline and the increased cortisol, you might find that a child is more restless than usual. I mean, children under the age of 6 generally are very active in any case, and that's where it can get difficult to see, is this a child who is just very active, or is it a case of that they are restless, they are more active than usual. So it's important to know the children that you're working with well, so that you can differentiate between that. It could also be a case of fatigue because of the increased stress hormones causing the child to be overly active. Then they might become more tired than usual. Other effects might also be dizziness, shaking, sweating, headache. Those are also things that can come up in children. Headache, and that might not come up as often in young children, but I have seen it come up as well. So also something important to consider. With the cognitive aspects, especially with younger children, the way that they think can be quite different, because their level of cognitive development, children under the age of 6 are still thinking in a very concrete manner, and they are still learning to distinguish between fantasy and reality. So for them, cognitive anxiety, or the cognitive aspects of anxiety, can be a lot more extreme. Children are more likely to have fearful thoughts. So things like monsters, if they watch a scary movie, those things are a lot more likely to cause fearful thoughts in them. Catastrophic thinking, that's something that adults do a lot. I don't see a lot of children that engage in this, but I have seen some where they think of the worst case scenario, like what would be the most catastrophic thing that could happen in this situation. Magical thinking would be believing that we can control things that we don't really have any influence over. So for example, a child might think that if they wish hard enough, that something might really happen, or they might think that they can influence something. So if they may be anxious about their parent being away, their mom or dad are going on a trip, they might think that if they do something, or if they don't do something in the right way, then mom or dad might have an accident. So anything that they feel that they could have control over, something that in no way they would be able to influence, that would be considered magical thinking. Young children, of course, and this is the misleading part. I mean, we expect them to believe in things like Santa and the Easter Bunny, and they can't really distinguish between fantasy and reality. And it's really fun for them to believe in things like that, but because of that, it causes them to have these beliefs in other things like monsters and vampires and all these other things as well. And because they're still at that developmental level, that can also naturally increase anxiety. And who are we to tell them that monsters and things are not real when we expect them to believe in the tooth fairy as well? So also something to consider. Attention bias to threat would be where children have more of an increased focus on negative stimuli. So they are more likely to focus on negative events than positive events. So an example of this would be like if you walk into a room, you're more likely to notice if the room is messy than if the room is clean. So sometimes it's just something that's become a habit that we've gotten more used to paying attention to. Sometimes it can also be like that for younger children as well. Overgeneralization is something that a lot of younger children tend to do. So if they have one scary experience, like if a dog barks at them, then they might be terrified of dogs, and they might start to believe that all dogs are scary and dangerous. So one little experience can turn into, everything related to that, or everything that they associate with that becomes scary. And then cognitively as well, young children, of course, developmentally have a shorter attention span, and then that can also lead to more difficulty with concentrating, and that can also lead sometimes to more intrusive thoughts, because their attention is jumping from topic to topic, and they're not really able to control where their attention goes just yet. So when it comes to a technique that an adult might use, like distracting ourselves or thinking of something else, that can be a lot more difficult for younger children to do, which can then lead to difficulty with them regulating their anxiety. Behavioral aspects. So I think we've all probably heard of the fight, flight, and freeze response, and then the fawn response. So our fight responses for younger children, this would be anything that they are going to try to do to fight off the anxiety. So tantrums, physical and verbal aggression, things that would generally be perceived as bad behavior, very often that can actually be a stress response or a reaction to anxiety. Any destructive behavior like throwing things, breaking things, excessive defiance. So with toddlers, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, it is very, very normal, very developmentally appropriate for them to be defiant. But if you notice that there is excessive defiance, if it's happening more than usual, then that could be a sign of anxiety. Because the antidote for anxiety is control. Whenever we're seeking control, usually that would be a sign that we're anxious, and having that control can make us feel better. Perfectionism. Children who, especially with drawing, you might have noticed, they often use disclaimers. So they'll say, oh, but I'm not good at this, or can you draw this for me, or but I don't know how to draw a shoe, can you show me how to do it? Or they're just completely resistant to even trying. Those could be signs of perfectionism, or not wanting to even try at all. They'll rather just sit out of the activity. Children who are demanding attention could also be a fight response. Hyperactivity, that would link to the restlessness, but there's also a difference between restlessness and hyperactivity. So if it's a child who is usually not as active as that could also be an indication, as well as irritability because of the increased physiological reactions, the increased adrenaline. And some
Jamie, I'm just quickly going to stop you. We have about 10 minutes left, just so you know. Just making you aware of the time. We'll skip the second breakout room.
Okay. Oh, good.
Yeah. Thanks.
So I started quickly. Yeah, no, we started a few minutes late, so I apologize if we're going a little bit with time. So with the flight responses, these might be some things that you've seen as well. So any kind of avoidance, hiding away, running away, these are also very, very common. Thinking especially with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, they tend to withdraw and try to hide away if they're feeling anxious about something. Social withdrawal, not wanting to play with friends. Clinginess, that would come with separation anxiety. And then the physical complaints like the stomach cramps that I mentioned, and then also avoiding eye contact. So with the avoiding eye contact culturally as well, working in international environments, that would be something to keep in mind. But sometimes that can also be a type of flight trying to avoid. Freeze responses could be things like excessive crying. And again, this is where it gets difficult to differentiate, because with younger children, crying is something that, it's not foreign to them. So if it is excessive, if it's a child that would not normally cry as much as this, or if it's situations that they wouldn't normally cry as much in, then that could be a sign of anxiety. Any kind of repetitive behaviors, speech difficulties like stuttering that weren't there before, that could be a sign that they are kind of frozen in that moment. So they're just repeating what they're doing over and over because they're stuck in that moment and they can't get out of it. Physical immobility, where children just become a puddle. They just kind of fall down on the ground. Toddlers tend to do that a lot, where you have to kind of drag them along, where they just don't want to get up and do things. That could be a sign of anxiety if they're freezing. Or children who are just staring, so excessive eye contact could also be a sign of it. And then any kind of developmental regression as well. The fawn response is one to look for, because the fawn response is where children are trying to do what they think you want them to do, because that in a way that is soothing their anxiety. So children who are overly compliant, they tend to often be overlooked. So it's really important to consider this, because you might think, oh, what a good child, what a well-behaved child, but it might just be that they are anxious and they're doing whatever it is that you say, because they're just, that's what they feel that they have to do, and that they don't actually have a voice. So children who are over apologizing, they say sorry over and over again, if they are excessively wanting to help, if they're asking a lot of questions, is my picture nice, is this good, and then constantly seeking reassurance for things as well. That could also be some behavioral signs of anxiety. Just very quickly, the difference between anxiety and an anxiety disorder. So anxiety, again, it's a completely natural part of everyday life, but something becomes an anxiety disorder if it is something that is happening very, very often. We look at the intensity, so how much is it affecting the child, the age and the developmental appropriateness. It's developmentally appropriate for a toddler to be having daily tantrums, but if it's a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, that's not really developmentally appropriate anymore. We also look at the impact on daily functioning. So it's normal for a 2-year-old or 3-year-old to have separation anxiety if they're coming to kindergarten for the first time and it's something new and they're feeling anxious. But if it is impacting their daily functioning so much that they cannot go into kindergarten at all, or they're clinging to their parents, to the point that it's, they're starting to get sore hands, or if it's causing anything that's going to cause physical harm to them, or they're not able to participate in learning at all, then we might say that it's starting to become an anxiety disorder. And also the response to supports. So the average child would be able to be comforted. Their parasympathetic nervous system would eventually kick in when the threat is no longer there. But children who have developed anxiety disorders, they wouldn't necessarily respond to support in the same way. And these are just some of the most common types of anxiety that we see in young children. Separation anxiety is the most common type, and then we've also got specific phobias. Being scared of spiders or the dark are very common ones. Generalized anxiety, those are children who just tend to worry about anything and everything. So their physiological responses are just constantly up. They're constantly in this state of anxiety. Selective mutism, children who can talk, they're physically capable of talking, but they are not able to in certain situations. And then social anxiety, that's something that we see more in older children, but we can start to see it in children from around 3 or 4. It is possible. It's not as common, but it's possible as well. Okay, just for time purposes, I'm going to go to the next breakout room. So thinking of the perceptions that you discussed earlier,
Jamie, I don't think we're gonna do the breakout room. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, okay, that's absolutely fine. But maybe it's something that everyone can just take away with them, just to think about.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay, yeah, something that you can just take away with you. It's just to think about how these different perceptions of anxiety will influence the way that adults respond. So everything I've just mentioned with the physiological responses, cognitive, and all these behavioral signs that we see of anxiety in young children, the way that you perceive anxiety itself and anxiety in children, how would that influence the way that that you would respond? And if we think about reframing these perceptions, how could that change the outcome of how we interact with the kids, and then potential impact on anxiety? Okay, then yeah, for time purposes, then I'll leave it there. Yeah, and I apologize. I know that we started a few minutes later, but if there is more interest in this, then I would be happy to do another talk. Maybe in the future we could plan for that. I could get some feedback if there's certain aspects that anyone wants to know more about, then yeah, that's just something that we could look at. It's just such a broad topic. Yeah, it's difficult to go into detail with absolutely everything. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It was super useful. I've made a million notes, and I think definitely a follow-up would be great, and maybe we can try and put our heads together and come up with some strategies that we can all use. Some of us might have trialed and tested ones that people can share, because I think everyone agrees, right, that we definitely see an increase of anxiety in our children for whatever reason. And
definitely, I can also share some of the support strategies as well. I can share a link to that can be sent to everyone.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
And Jamie, we can put the last questions that you post for your second breakout room in our LinkedIn group and see people, maybe if people interact or write some answers. Everyone left in this room still, feel free to interact with that post that we will share, so you can follow up with more answers and thoughts.
And Jamie, if possible, if you have any resources for parents, that would be great.
Definitely. Yeah, I think everything with the strategies and that I was going to share, but just for time reasons won't be possible. I can put everything together and then can share that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Regards from Panama. My colleague and I are here from King's College in Panama. So we are seeing you all the way from Central America.
Oh, wow. It's been early in the morning for you.
Yeah, it's 10 a.m. in the morning, and we had to find covers so that we could be here. But thank you. It was very useful, and it would be amazing if somehow we could all connect and, you know, get that networking going with professionals that are into, you know, this social emotional learning for the kids that is so important.
Yeah, definitely it is. It's such an important topic as well, and it is so broad. It's very difficult to fit everything into such a short time limit. So yeah, it would be great to connect and then share more about that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. And just to echo what Bea said, if you follow us on LinkedIn, you can just hit us up there with things that you would like for us to provide for you in this community. So if there's any struggles you're having, if you want more of Jamie, or you want more of anything else, join that LinkedIn community and let us know. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world.